Giovanni, I mean, Wratislawia Cantans is not what it says, in the sense that, well, let's talk about what it is not, really. Wratislawia Cantans is not in Bratislava in Slovakia. It's in Wrocław in Poland. And Cantans suggests that it's just a choir and choral festival, and it isn't that at all either. So, in fact, the festival happens not just in Wrocław, but in many places around the region in Silesia. And so I wanted to ask, first of all, about the festival and how you feel it, what its direction is, what do you feel its core is?
Well, Wratislawia Cantans is a ancient festival because it started in 1966, if I'm not wrong, or 65, but I think 66. And as you told, was devoted to the, let's say, oratorio music, so vocal sacred music mainly. But I think they never was only devoted to sacred music and only vocal music. And as you can see from the program, it's true that we have a main concert there in Wrocław, that especially since when we have a beautiful modern hall, the National Forum of Music, that is, I consider one of the best acoustic in Europe. And but also traditionally, we make the concert also in the churches in the town and also in the region, in Lower Silesia, that actually is a beautiful region that is full of historical palace, theaters, and castles. So it's a festival that has a really long tradition. And of course, when I arrived as an artist director, I brought my personality, my experience, and that you can see from the program also of this year.
I don't really think of you as a choral conductor at all. I mean, I think of you as, with your group Il Giardino Armonico, as being very much a Baroque specialist, but a Baroque specialist in the instrumental tradition. You're a flautist yourself. And I wonder what attracted you to something that is so distinctly choral or choir-based.
I would say that I'm a very curious person. And it's true that even if my formation is mainly around instrumental music, but we don't have to forget that I have also many experience with singers, maybe less with choral music, but for example, the famous album I did with Cecilia Bartoli, the Vivaldi album, really was something very important in the field of vocal music. But also the fact that it's true, my repertoire is mainly Baroque and now classical, early Romantic. But of course, Wratislawia Cantans present music for every time, from Middle Age to modern music. So this also was very interesting for me to research, to study, and also for my personal activity, gave many impulse to research, not only about my core repertoire, but also, for example, about modern repertoire, like now that we are performing with Patricia Kopaczynskaja, even modern music and with Giardino Armonico. I think it is also a result of this experience. I have to say that I learned many things since I'm artistic director of the festival.
I've always felt that the early music movement and the Baroque orchestra tradition has actually much more in common with the late 20th and early 21st century tradition than either do with the 19th century. And I think it's very interesting the way that contemporary composers are now working with early music and Baroque orchestra groups. Absolutely.
But I would say that it didn't start only in the end of 20th century. I think the interest for all music was also a part of let's say, avant-garde composer of the second half of 20th century. We can think the interest for Renaissance and Middle Age music by Gheorghe Ligeti, for example. So this relation with the past was, I would say, always important, even for the so-called avant-garde composer. And is a characteristic also of the program of the festival, where we have really music from try to have a sort of red line in the festival, but we have really music that start from middle age, maybe not this year, not in this year edition, but for sure until 20th century and 21st century music.
One of the fascinating programs is the one that you're directing, which is looking at the Venetian family of Bassano, who went from Venice to London in the early 16th century to the court of Henry VIII as great improvisers. And that's a fascinating program. It seems to me that that draws in many of the elements that you're talking about, because you're not actually performing that much music by them. You're performing music from around the time, and you're doing it in a synagogue, which is, again, something that's outside that churchy tradition.
Yes, well, the synagogue of Wrocław is a very good venue for concerts. The acoustic is very good, and the sites fit very well for a small ensemble. We are 6 musicians. And of course, the story of the Bassano family always was very fascinating for me, also because for sure it's linked to another very important, at least very important musician of Renaissance, that was Silvestro Ganassi, that wrote a very important treatise for the recorder, where he described very complex way to improvise on vocal music. And I could compare his art to the jazz musician, that they take, for example, the standard, the so-called standard, let's say Summertime, for example, and they do their own version of this piece. And it's the same way how Renaissance performers did with madrigal, for example. They took, I don't know, Ancor che col partire by Cipriano d'Errore, and they improvise and they transform completely the piece, producing an instrumental version. But of course, this you spoke about Bassano as great improviser, that probably they were great. They play recorded, trombone, cornetto, they play all instruments, but also they were a very important builder of instruments. The Museum of Europe are full of Bassano instruments, also of a different generation, because after the King Henry VIII called them, they established in London, England, and he started a Bassano family, really English, as English musician that pass, and it lasts at least until 1665, this generation. So this program presents the music that probably that Bassano family could have played, and not really Bassano composer, because we have very few pieces by them. And there is also one Bassano from Venezia, that's Giovanni Bassano, that is most probably more known, that was in the orchestra of Giovanni Gabrieli in San Marco, in the cathedral.
Do you think that tradition carries on in Venice through the Baroque period, that tradition of improvisation, and that perhaps our sense of Baroque music now has lost our attention to the score, if you like, that was so prevalent for 19th century composers, has perhaps lost that freedom that contemporary Baroque composers expected their musicians to have?
Absolutely, yes. We lost something when we created probably the concept of classical music, as we call. And we don't have to forget that composers like Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven, Brahms, and they were all in some way improvisers. But more we go on toward the 20th century, more we want to fix. We are a bit obsessed by the text, also the philology, the philological text, that is a very positive matter. But I think that for example, in 16th century, 17th century, the approach to the music was completely different. They really made music just meeting. They know the pieces. There was a common background. Like jazz musician that sometimes they meet for the first time. They know the pieces and they start to produce new music in that moment. And I spoke about Ganassi, this composer that, of course, is quite obscure today, but how he presented many formulas of improvisation, hundreds of formulas. And I would say what is very interesting is the rhythmical approach, because Ganassi wrote things, formulas like 5 against 4, 7 against 4, rhythmically very complex. And I think is an effort to put on paper what they did improvising. So a sort of written rubato. And I would say that after this time, the treatise was published in 1535. And I think after Ganassi, step by step, the rhythm in music become more simple. You have to arrive to 20th century to have similar complexity to Ganassi, but also, for example, to Ars Subtilior of Middle Age, where the composer wrote very complex things that you can really compare to what the avant-garde composer of 20th century wrote.
And do you feel that in your programming for Wratislawia Cantans, you're beginning to get a feel for the breadth of music making? I mean, I can see that there's a huge range of stuff in the program. There's some Beethoven in there, there's some Poulenc, but there's also some really quite challenging programs that explore music from many different traditions. You've even, they've got plenty of work in there that does not come from what you describe as a normal festival program.
It's true. I always start from an idea, from a topic, from something that impressed me. In this case, the title is Dangerous Liaisons. I don't know if in French or English, but because finally I read the book, the famous book of Laclos, and maybe it's more known, the film of Stephen Frears. And then this idea of the dangerous relations start to run in my brain. And I like to associate a concept to different type of suggestions in music. And of course, you have many very different things. You have De Cavalieri, but also you have La Voix Humaine by Poulenc. And we can say, okay, where is the dangerous liaison? Is De Cavalieri, of course, soul and body, and historically is a very dangerous relation, but also in Poulenc it's clear that when this monodrama by Poulenc is the relation with a woman, with the ex-lover. And so I like to take the topic in a very wide meaning. So I'm not obsessed to be really strictly and to do an encyclopedic festival. And I like the variety. I like that because also myself, I'm fascinated from very different type of music. And this, the program in some way is a mirror of this, of myself in this approach.
Giovanni, thank you very much. That was absolutely great.
Thank you.
Thank you.